morning, guys. Welcome back to another day, another chapter, and another study of the Bible vlog. So Acts 14 is where we are picking up today, and we're still continuing on Paul's first missionary journey. So a common theme that we see repeated over and over again whenever Paul, Barnabas, Peter, any of these guys are preaching about Jesus is that it causes division. And this is no different than today. Whenever you talk about Jesus, you will always have people on one side who are willing to give their life to him, they dedicate their life to Christ, and they experience life change. On the other hand, you have people who don't want to believe, and they say, well, why would you believe in fairy tales? You know, if God really exists, why is there so much evil in the world? They pose all these questions. They want to know all the answers and have everything understood before they choose to believe in God. And here's the thing, you will never be able to fully understand God's character. There are certain things that we have to believe by faith as believers, as Christians. But again, whenever you preach about Jesus, this is the kind of reaction that will always happen. And Jesus even predicted this. In fact, look at this. In Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 39, look at what Jesus said. Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. That does not sound like our stereotypical Jesus. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. Now this sounds crazy to hear Jesus saying these things in Matthew, but do you know what he's referring to? He's referring to the reaction that will always happen whenever Jesus and the gospel is preached. You will have some people who believe and are willing to obey at almost any cost. Then you have other people who say, I refuse to believe in God. I refuse to follow Jesus. No matter what is given to me, no matter how much life change I see in a person, I want to do things my way. And Jesus says this is going to cause division. It will cause families to be separated, but you have to choose. Are you going to follow God at any cost, or are there some things that you are not willing to give up simply for following Jesus? It's our choice. So coming back to Acts now, Paul and Barnabas are now preaching in a synagogue in a place known as Iconium. And it says in verse 1 that they began preaching in the synagogue and that tons of people came to Christ as a result of their preaching. It says both Jews and Greeks, who were considered Gentiles, all of them start coming to Christ. It says that signs and wonders were following the preaching of the gospel and that many people were coming to Christ, so that they stayed in this area for a long time and continued preaching Jesus. But in verse 5 we read about that there was a violent attempt by those who opposed them, where they raised up people and they were actually going to take Paul and Barnabas outside of the city and try and stone them and kill them. They learn about this plot, and so they flee the city and they move on to a place called Lystra. Now when Paul and Barnabas come to Lystra, there's a lame man who has never walked before, and he gets healed by the power of Jesus. But look at what happens in verse 8. And in Lystra a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice to the crippled man, this is Paul speaking, stand up straight on your feet. And immediately he leaped and walked. The Bible indicates that this man was hearing Paul preaching. He had faith in God that he could heal him. Paul recognized this. The Holy Spirit reached out to this man, heals him, and it says that he starts leaping and walking. Now this caused no small commotion when this happened in Lystra. Everybody takes notice. People know that this guy has not been able to walk his entire life. Now he's walking around praising God, but look at the reaction of what they mistake Paul and Barnabas for. In verse 11, now when the people saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Iconian language, the gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. These people literally think that Paul and Barnabas are now Greek gods and that they're in the flesh form healing people in front of them. Now nothing could be further from the truth, but these people don't understand this. In verse 12, and Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. These people are trying to take Paul and Barnabas and put them into a category of Greek mythology, of Greek gods, so that it fits with the way that they have perceived supernatural things. Otherwise, they can't understand it. They haven't even been preached the gospel to yet. Paul and Barnabas just arrived in their city, and the first thing that happens is a miracle. They don't know about Jesus yet. Now listen to this. Things start really getting out of hand. In verse 13, then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen, garland to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the people to Paul and Barnabas. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the people, crying out and saying, men, why are you doing these things? We are also men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless ways to serve the living God, who made heaven, the earth, the sea, and all the things that are in them. Paul and Barnabas are trying to tell them, look, we're nobody. We're just guys like you. We have no special powers. We can't heal anybody on our own. This is simply all about Jesus. I'm sure they might also be thinking about what happened the last time somebody claimed he was a god. So Paul and Barnabas explained to these people, we are men just like you. But it says in verse 18 that they could scarcely restrain the people from sacrificing to them. Even when they were telling them, look, We're nobody special. They still wanted to insist on making a sacrifice to Paul and Barnabas. Now in verse 19, we read about the Jewish people who are at Iconium have tracked Paul and Barnabas to this new city, Lystra, and they start telling the people about all the problems that they were supposedly causing in their city previously. They rally people around their cause. They convince them that Paul and Barnabas are liars, that they're there to deceive people, and they persuade the people that these guys are there to take them away from their religion. And look at verse 19, what happens to Paul. They stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. Now look at verse 20. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. Now there's some speculation here on whether or not Paul actually died and was raised back to life, but it's hard for me to imagine being stoned to death where people literally think you have died. Then when the disciples gather around you, you rise up as if nothing happened. Now that's pretty crazy because getting stoned is not the same thing that it is now.
Pizzas, we need 2 big pizzas, man.
This was literally people picking up rocks the size of bricks and throwing them at you until you stopped moving. It was a horrible way to die, and this is what happens to Paul. They think he's dead, and he comes back to life. Listen, the Holy Spirit was not done using Paul yet. Finally, at the end of the chapter, we see Paul and Barnabas returning to Antioch, where they were originally sent out from, and they report to the apostles everything that has happened, that the Holy Spirit has been given to the Gentiles, that people everywhere they go, that they're wanting to know more about God, that there is a hunger for the salvation that is coming through Christ, and that the gospel message is literally spreading everywhere. Guys, one of the most exciting things to see about the early church is that nothing could stop it. The message of Jesus Christ was spreading everywhere because people recognized that it was real. There was power behind what these men were saying. When they preached, it was with authority. Signs and wonders were following them. And listen, it doesn't have to be any different today. When you tell people about Jesus, you have to understand the God of the universe is behind you, and what you are saying is true. What we have been given, guys, can change a person's life, and that is why I constantly encourage people, if you don't know Jesus, you have to know him. There is no better decision you will ever make in your life than coming to follow Christ. Guys, that is going to be it for us today. Listen, thank you as always for joining us this week. I hope you have a very beautiful weekend. Make sure you come back on Monday. We're going to be picking it up right where we left off in Acts chapter 15. There's still quite a bit to go in Acts, but then we are continuing on in the New Testament. I don't want you to miss a thing. Make sure you come back here on Monday. We will see you back here then. I hope you have a very, very beautiful weekend. We will see you guys soon. Take care.